All right, so for today's assignment, we're basically starting with exercise 1. And to be fair, let's get familiar with a couple of places that we'll need to know first. The first one being right at the top of Miro. You'll see that right below the class it says Google Drive link. This is essentially where I put all the bigger files. To be fair, Miro doesn't like anything above like 5 megabytes. You may have noticed if you've ever uploaded a PDF that's like 100 megabytes, it kind of just like sits there, especially at the school, right? It doesn't have the greatest internet in the world. So we do need to use platforms differently. So in our case, if you click on the link itself, it'll bring you right to it. Slowly, of course. But essentially, the first file I've actually given you guys. So there's a Rhino template file. That way you don't have to start from scratch. And we can basically go over this together. How many of you guys, this is the first time opening Rhino ever? Okay, yeah. So definitely the case. I got to go a little bit slow for those guys. Just keep in mind, it's going to pick up some pace. That being said, I do allow a lot of time in class to work on stuff. Don't get me wrong, I only try to take up really half the class and really allow at least an hour to an hour and a half to ask questions, get answers. So if you have a question kind of in the moment, please write it down, all right? Because somebody else might have the exact same question. And what's even better is when we can get it even on the recording, right? And please don't be afraid. There's no such thing as a dumb question, really only dumb answers, right? But in my case, yes, here's my crabapple designs. I'm not sure why that opened up. I was hoping for my Google Drive. Hopefully this is still correct. Okay, yeah. So it is still correct. And you'll notice I actually have quite a few things here, such as the Rhino 3D. So if you wanted to install this at home, I totally didn't tell you that, but it only downloads at home, right? Don't try and download it at school. In fact, they have a proxy on their Wi-Fi system that will delete files out of it, right, that are actually necessary for installation. If you do want that personally on your computer, I would say bring your computer in. I can help you install it, right, whether it be a Windows or a Macintosh. However, please don't bring your desktop, right? If anything, you can even record me going through it, and we can figure it out together. It's not impossible, right? However, if you have a desktop at home, you can definitely use it as well. That being the case, some of my base files, such as like cardboard stands and things like this, keep in mind I just, for reference and things like this. For today and today's assignment, we'll essentially go to, actually I think that was it. In our case, Rhino 7 version. That's, so you'll notice the only drawback to maybe Rhinoceros, which is actually arguably already better than Revit, is that it does have backwards compatibility, right? However, it doesn't have frontwards compatibility. So if I make something in Rhino 7, I cannot open it in Rhino 8, right? But if I make something in Rhino 8, I can open it up in any Rhino, right? Now what stinks about Revit is if I make it in 2026, I literally can't even use it in 2025, 2024, 2022, any of them. It only works in Revit 2026, right? Which is very annoying. And if this is absolutely going over your head, don't worry about it. It's a little bit more advanced anyway. But in our case, we'll actually want to download the basic Rhino command template. So in my case, I'm going to right click, download. And to be honest, every semester I do the entire project with you essentially, right? So I'm getting pretty good at it, to say the very least, but I do talk a lot and try to give fair instruction. I would say for the sake of time, sometimes I leave stuff off, right? Which is why I'm saying those old videos might be somewhat more helpful if I decided to continue here or there and things like this. But let's go ahead and download it for today, and we'll open that one up right away. However, if you have Rhino 7, you'll download this Rhino 7 version 1, right? So just keep that in mind. If you have Windows already, and I gave you my version, right? It's a Rhino 7, right? Because there's not really a huge difference between Rhino 7 and Rhino 8. But that being the case, another link that might be helpful is also on the page. I put even some of my favorite links for like studio or site resources, and we'll use them sometimes. But to be fair, hopefully you're using this page for your studio too, right? I mean, it's got a plethora of stuff, and you don't necessarily always have to go on the internet and just try to find something good. To be honest with you, there's a lot more bad videos, but they're getting a lot better, right? What's even great is some are like architect students or past architect students that decided to be YouTubers instead of doing anything, and those are really good, right? I mean, don't get me wrong. I am not a YouTuber. I teach at San Antonio College. This is just my way of actually reaching some of the students. The first time I taught this class, I didn't make any recordings, and noticed that people were watching all different kinds of things, getting in all different kinds of places, doing it wrong over here, doing it right over there. So this is, of course, an effort to make it a little bit more consistent as well. However, if you click on the YouTube link, it'll bring you right to the San Antonio College PR video that I made years ago. But it also has all the videos that we do, right? So the archived videos or any of the playlists and things like that. To be fair, I do keep them all on there, right? It's not really going to help you, right? I mean, you still got to turn in the assignment. But if you actually just wanted to learn the program, you can, right? You just won't get any credit for it. But essentially, I do all of my tutorials and try to record all of them. So just in case there's something I missed, you can, of course, find it. However, if you see it stop somewhere, check the archive videos. I literally have how to use the laser cutter, how to draw a golden ratio, the rain stick that I created entirely out of Rhino and made literally $1 million off of. So what I'm trying to say is it's a very profitable skill, guys. Whether you decide to use this in architecture or not, I've thought about it like, man, why did I choose architecture, right? I could have just started like 8 businesses, but I had no idea what I was doing when I was 18, right? I don't know what I knew now at 35, right? But in this case, it is, I think, pretty exciting and sometimes a little bit inspirational, right? You don't necessarily, if you're kind of someone who still doesn't really know what they want to do, like, that's okay, right? And I really wish somebody would actually have told me that in college. But it really isn't a race, guys. And to be fair, everybody has a different speed when it comes to these programs, right? Especially coming from analog. So anyway, let's get right into it. In my case, I've already have that download, so I'm going to go ahead and open that first. In my case, I'll click on Rhino 8, let it load up a little bit. Let's use another screen for this one. Obviously, with my version, never update it, right? Always skip that version. But in my case, let's go over to it. In my case, I could say new model, but I just downloaded that other one, so I'm going to say open other, and of course go to my downloads. In my case, I'll go with the one that I downloaded today. And you'll see a couple of things that I've already put in there for you to, of course, help some things out. Now, obviously, since for some of us this is our first time, keep in mind that obviously I do have the Mac interface side, and that not everything looks the exact same, but does have the same stuff, if that makes sense, right? The icons are the same picture, the commands are the same name, but where the command bar, where some of the stuff or the buttons are completely foreign and sometimes different, right? I do try to call those things out, especially the differences between Macintosh and Windows in terms of their commands and or their shortcut systems, but bear with me. You know, I can only do so much all the time. But once you open that file, this is of course what you'll see, and by default, if you're looking at it, the things that are the same are obviously our viewports, which is what these are called. You'll see that you have a top viewport, perspective, front, and right by default. Keep in mind that you'll notice that when I click on them, the viewport enables, right? It sort of turns blue. That's important because it means that viewport is active, right? And in some cases, when you're doing certain commands, that viewport, if that's what you're trying to get, well, it's only going to get it if you have that viewport enacted. The next thing that we have, at least on the Macintosh side, is basically our shortcut keys, where it has tons of tools, right? The ones that you use most of the time, which is nice for Mac to do. However, on Windows, you'll notice that it's at the top, right? And these sort of tabulated, similar to what Macintosh has right here, but just a little bit different. So again, just getting more familiar with the UI alone can be somewhat helpful. Obviously, if you've already worked in Rhino, I'm sorry, this part is absolutely boring, right? Because you already know where some things are and maybe some things aren't. One of my favorite tools of all time is, of course, to select something and zoom select it, which is basically a magnifying glass with like 2 little yellow cells in it. But again, it makes things really easy, and especially if I'm out in the middle of nowhere and I just select one thing, I can bring them instantly back into view with zoom selected. I can also just type in zoom selected, another benefit to not using Revit. Anyway, I'm gonna dog on Revit a lot, but anyway. In our case, we also have a couple of tools down here known as the O-snap tool. Apparently nobody thinks that's funny anymore. I still think O-snap is hilarious, but in our case it is a very popular and very useful tool for accuracy. In fact, if this isn't on in your drawing, you're doing it wrong, right? This thing is amazing, and if you're familiar with AutoCAD, it's the exact same thing. It's also called O-snap in AutoCAD, right? Which basically you have your endpoint, near, which is very dangerous, by the way. Please don't ever use near. We have our point, midpoint, center point, intersection point, perspective, and to be fair, I've never used tangent, quad, knot, or vertex or project in my entire life, but it is there and it is available. On the Mac side, we also have the filters, which is pretty cool. I will argue that Revit probably does this better, but filter is kind of nice if I need a certain thing, right? And if I have 1,000,000 points and I need a line that's inside those 1,000,000 points, well, you can imagine selecting that one line is going to be kind of difficult. But if I turn off all the points, making that line is going to be a lot easier to select. Obviously, speaking a little bit of foreign language here, we'll get there when we get there. But getting some of these tools is imperative, right? At the bottom, you'll notice this is also on the Windows and Mac side, but you'll see that we have a grid snap, we have orthographic, which is really nice if you're trying to move something orthographically. So for instance, if I type in move, and I'm trying to move this, if ortho is on, it's only going to move it in a 90-degree way, right? Which is kind of nice sometimes, especially in architecture where we work with a lot of horizontal and vertical lines. In our case, I'm going to leave it off, but grid snap is kind of cool. Some people prefer it, especially if they're working in a certain scale or they want their grid to only be 6 inches. They can do something like that. That way you're not accidentally making something 6 foot and 9 inches instead of, you know, when your professor told you, no, I only want single foot measurements or distances. Or if you're trying to make grids or something like this, obviously it's a lot easier in some sort of grid snap view. Planar, I've honestly never used it to be completely fair. And to be fair, I'm not 100% on this program either. There's just so much to know in a lifetime, especially with some of the software. In our case, O-snap is definitely, you can turn it on or off here, and you'll see that it enacts as there as well. Smart Track, definitely one of my favorite tools. If you've ever used Adobe and you get all those little lines when it's trying to help you with other things, Smart Track is basically the exact same thing for Rhino. Gumball, I have no idea why they call it Gumball, but it is kind of cool. I'm a fan of the show Gumball as well. But in my case, you'll see that there's these axis arrows or rotation arcs that are available every time that I click an object. That only becomes apparent if Gumball is on. You'll see that if I turn Gumball off, I now have to type in commands every time I want to move something. What is nice about Gumball is once it's enacted, I can basically select anything and move it at any given time. To be fair, once Gumball is on, I can really move it just about anywhere, which is kind of great because I don't have to type in a command, I don't really have to do anything, and it's pretty intuitive. When I want to move something, I can move it. The next one, of course, auto C-plane. Yeah, just leave that checked. You'll find that the C-plane is one of those difficult things just in Rhino. It basically stands for our control world, right? And basically what that means is, you see this little grid, right, that's there? That helps us identify what 0, 0, 0 is, right? Remember what I said? This entire program is actually a bunch of math, right? This actually maybe goes with the myth that, oh man, you're going to be in architecture, you're going to have to know a lot of math, right? How many of you guys felt like you're now a mathematician? Yeah, me neither. But maybe in some cases compared to family, but in our case, we let the programs do a lot of the math for us, right? So don't get me wrong, yes, it's probably good to know calculus and how these programs are actually working. Is it imperative to know and work the software? Not really. So, but it does make you the smartest guy or gal in the room, so that's always good too. And of course, if you are the smartest person in the room, guess what? You're in the wrong room, right? Anyway, as the saying or old Chinese proverb goes. Anyway. But at least to explain this a little bit more, you'll also know that you have your Properties tab over here, and it is customizable. You can change these things, and you'll notice if by default you guys realize you accidentally clicked on something and you're like, oh my gosh, I accidentally got rid of all my tools. One of the first things that you can actually do is make sure you go to Window, right? We'll go to, man, where'd it go? Happens to me all the time. Where did it go? oh, sorry, Windows layouts, and we can actually set it back to a default. So in our case, I can set it back to a default. It's going to say, hey, are you sure you really want to do that? I'm going to say yes and apply. And it's basically going to reset my tools right back to the welcome page. I probably shouldn't have done that because I had a lot of settings in there, but I do want to show it for the sake of tutorial. It is a pretty awesome program in terms of customability, right? You can really customize yours. However, if you're on a school computer, please don't do that, right? Because it really messes it up for the next guy. Next thing you know, tools are everywhere. However, I would say if you have your personal computer or your desktop at home, feel free. There's actually a lot of great things that you can do to make this a little bit better. But as you can see, I got rid of a lot of my tools that obviously I made my own, but that's okay. We'll add them as we go. But as you can see, if you have a Retina screen or a very high density screen, sometimes moving these things are very, very close. As you can see, it can become a little difficult to get that just right. But we'll try. There we go, we got it. Anyway, I like my toolbars to be a little bit bigger. To be fair, I don't do any kind of work on a laptop. I just have the laptop for work. At my house, I have three 30-inch screens because I cannot see crap, all right? And so I need actually all of my viewports on a gigantic screen so that I can see it. If you're like that, awesome. We have these 27-inch screens and I would use them. In fact, I would even encourage that you work on the school computer because it has a larger screen. And if you're watching tutorials and have a laptop or iPad, watch the tutorials or iPad stuff, right? That way you can pause it or sketch or do something else while actually working on the screen, right? Keep in mind, we probably don't have enough room for double screens anymore. So I made the change of actually just getting everybody a 27-inch screen. So, however, they didn't get the memo for those last four. Those are the old screens we used to have. They're still VGA. Absolutely awful. Anyway, back to the viewports. If you double click on a viewport, it actually makes it twice as large or fills up the entire view page. If you double click on it again, it goes back to the 4, right? Clearly, for some of us, I would encourage that you actually start to get familiar with working in elevation view and your perspective view and your top view all at the same time. It does take some getting used to, right, to say the very least, and it does take a larger screen to say the least as well. But that being the case, you'll notice if you're in the top view, it's much more like AutoCAD. This would be the view that you would see in AutoCAD or even Revit, right? Typically, when we make our floor plan, that would be that typical view as well. Obviously, front or right side would be your elevation view. So you can see that regardless, actually our C-plane is pretty confusing here, right? It shows it flat no matter what, right? Regardless of the view that we're in. And to be fair, it still confuses me to this day, especially when it changes the same color as some of these items and things like that. However, if you need another side of the view, you can always click on this little down arrow and see that there's a ton of options for all of these. Yes, they're slightly different per view as well, so keep that in mind. However, when I set view, I can set just about any view. If I wanted a perspective and if I wanted two perspective views, I totally can, right? However, to be fair, it's still going to keep my C-plane like that horizontal view. Again, another reason why sometimes the C-plane is not so great, but it does identify 000 for us, so that is important, right? And you'll see, especially once we go into other programs, that 00 point seems to be the only thing that's really guiding and controlling the geometry or the code, if you will. But in our case, we'll double click on double click on top view. And in my case, I've separated them for us. One is actually a bunch of digital commands. We won't worry about that today. For today's assignment, really we're only focused on the 2 dimensions still. And to be fair, we might actually use a couple of 3-dimensionals. I lied. Actually in the first exercise, I think you will. So anyway, scratch that. But in our case, let's actually change the layer real quick. So you'll notice that there is a layers bar. And yes, I accidentally have some layers that you don't even need. So you can totally delete that if you just were wondering what A glazing was. Basically standing for glass. And in my case, I don't even think it wants me to delete it. Let's turn it back on and delete maybe. Wow, it doesn't even want me to do it. Oh, because it's a block. Anyway, doesn't matter. But there might be some extra stuff in your file. I apologize. But I do want to explain that we can change the colors on a dime, right? So for instance, these walls are the color red. So I'm going to double click on red for today and make it orange. That way we can see it a little bit better. And maybe that's not the layer in question. There we go. Makes that, I don't know, not entirely much easier. It looks better on the recording screen, so I guess that's important. But let's choose a color that everybody can see today. Green. That looks pretty good, right? So in my case, you can see that the layer is controlling the geometry as well. If I add to the layer, or change the layer, or turn off the layer, right, it works just like really any other Adobe program or things like that in that sense. However, we have some commands, and it is pretty intuitive. I will say, like, these 10 alone is just about all you need, honestly, to draw in Rhinoceros. So in my case, I put like step 1, step 2. Normally other teachers kind of do an entire assignment. They spend weeks on this. I give it to you all on the first day, right? Lo and behold, you might use some, you might not use some. To be fair, there's about 15 ways to do the exact same thing in all of these programs. I'm not looking for the right way, not really looking for the wrong way. I'm looking for the most efficient way for you, right? Some of us actually like a little drawn out step by step, where some of us, we want to get to the point and we want to get to it fast. We got no time to spare, right? So there's definitely varying levels of completion. But for instance, if you highlight step 1, type in trim, enter, we can actually trim that and make it look like step 2, right? So I would say the best part about any digital platform is the ability to undo, right? So in our case on the Mac, if you do Command Z, it comes right back. On Windows, it's Control Z, right? So just keep that in mind. Extend is pretty cool. We'll have to select where we want to extend first. We'll type in extend, enter, and we'll click on where we want it to extend to. Awesome, right? However, keep in mind that if, well, this is not in a view that is going to hit that, right, it's not going to happen. So I'll type in extend again, and you'll notice it's like, hey, where do you want it to end? Because it has no end, right? It's not going to hit that plane ever, right? So keep that in mind. Some things work, some things don't. Like I said, we could do about 15 different things for the exact same thing. Fillet's pretty good though, right? Especially if you're in the same situation, I need those to conclude. I could highlight both, type in fillet, enter, and keep in mind, I should expand this a little bit more for you guys so you can see that a little bit better. Keep in mind that the command bar is trying to help you, both in Macintosh and Windows. In fact, more than often, it'll actually ask for the next step, right? It'll literally tell you, hey, select the curves that you would like to put together. Which leads me to my first confusing point about digital architecture. Curves and lines are both curves. It's very confusing and doesn't make sense in any other geometric sense, but curves, like I said, remember everything is in code. A curve is just, well, it's a line that has a slope, right? A constant changing slope. Well, a line, at least in a mathematical sense, is still a curve, but just with zero slope. Right, so don't get me wrong, that's at least the explanation for that. But yes, it is confusing that lines are called curves and curves are called curves. Anyway, they're all called curves, right? Anyway, but it's essentially the family of a mathematical type. So in our case, when I hit fillet, I can basically end those together. Now what's really cool about fillet as well is if I type in fillet, I can control the radius of an object as well. So if I wanted that radius to actually be 5 millimeters, I could. Right, so in my case, I'll now click on those 2 lines, and if we zoom in really close, it now added a little 5 millimeter radius. That's a game changer. Back in the day, at least when I started school, fillet did not do that, right? You had to sit there and draw another curve. You even had to draw a circle and trim off that circle just to get these kind of geometries. So what's nice again about Rhinoceros is it's constantly changing for the better. You'll see me actually often bring up the past because I'm an old man, and things were a lot different learning the program than I do teach it today even. But chamfer, we can do straight edge fillets if you will. Mirror I think is pretty obvious. If you want to mirror something, type in mirror, enter, and basically select that plane. Now watch that again, I do go fast, and that's of course why I record it as well. Hitting enter again or spacebar enacts the same command you just used, so that already saves some time. If I wanted mirror again, I just hit spacebar. In my case, however, I am controlling the mirror. You'll see that my orange line is actually more or less the mirror, right? How many of you guys ever played with a mirror as a kid in front of another mirror? right? I don't know. That was my summers in 1999. But in my case, I'm controlling the mirror here. So if I already have a line to be the mirror, I simply trace that line to be the mirror. Of course, getting those kinds of things. Hatch, yes. If you've taken me for graphics too, you're probably like, oh my gosh, I've never had to make a 45-degree angle again in terms of hatching and all these kinds of things, because, well, literally the software can do it for us now. We can quite literally select the object, type in hatch, enter, and quite literally get just about any line that we want, whether it be this or that, or actually even our own. So that is pretty interesting, and we'll get more into that as we go along. Offset, probably one of my favorite tools of all time, especially when I'm trying to make some walls for a floor plan. I'm going to offset, I'm going to say 6 inches, enter, and bam, I've got a 6-inch wall just like that. I didn't have to draw any more or any less, right? But it is game changer. Keep in mind that when you do draw stuff, it'll draw it in the layer that you selected last. So in my case, right now I have walls checked. That actually makes a lot of sense. But if I do want to change something, I can always right click and change the object layer, right? Of course it'll change orange, and that's a game changer in itself. But just keep in mind the layer tool is pretty awesome. It's pretty active, right? I would say even arguably more active than like Adobe. Sometimes for some reason layers just stink in Adobe. You have to click certain layers. That is not the case for Rhino, so that is a nice plus. But enough of these. I think they go without saying. Being able to erase something is pretty cool. I'm not gonna lie, that alone is like a Studio One project right there, studying patterns and things like this. So don't get me wrong, at any other school, guess what you do in the first 2 years? You do this, right? And it's actually very boring, to say the very least. I apologize, because it really was. They stuck me in a Digital Media 1 class, and by the first week I was like, sir, I already know this. Is there any way that I can test out of it? They had a special portfolio review for me, and I was able to go to Design Media 2 because I already knew what I was doing, right? Keep in mind, this was because of that class where I was teaching myself Rhinoceros. So when they stuck me in Digital Media 1, I was like, come on, dude, I already learned this in 2 weeks, and you're telling me I have to take 16-week semester, by the way, a $6,000 course, for free? No, like, heck no, I want to go into stage 2. And keep in mind that your degree plan is somewhat negotiable if you have an associate's and have graduated with an associate's. If you transfer to a school, not so negotiable. Why? Well, because that degree is already in stone, at least according to the computer, and you can't take a course outside of my graduation plan. Therefore, it is now negotiable, right? They can look at my portfolio, they can have a special review and go, well, they do actually know some things, right? Which is why it's so important to constantly, even arguably every semester, keep adding to your portfolio. You never know when you're going to need it by next week, right? Those kinds of things. Hopefully, the graphics department is already going over that. But in our case, that's enough tools for today. Let's go ahead and get started in the program. I did say this is probably the more lengthy, just because I'm really talking a lot and trying to explain a lot of the UI and the program interface. But let's get to the actual assignment. So you'll notice that I put it under week 1 today. And of course you have a physical copy as well. But let's just go over it. Yes, it is vague and mysterious, and actually on purpose. Because in that Digital Media 2 class, since we already had some knowledge about Rhino and 3D programming, more or less this is kind of what you would get for Texas Tech or U of H or UTSA. They give you these very vague instructions because, well, to be honest, they don't want to teach robots. They don't want to make robots. We want to make designers. We want to make creative, critical thinkers. And the only way to do that is actually to use the Socratic method. Well, to ask some questions and have you derive the answer through questioning, right? Which is what the Socratic method is. However, for today, yes, we are fall 2025, some basic modeling and diagramming, and our assignment is this. For our first exercise, we will be starting small. However, our goal is to start working in the way of which an architect might in the professional world. We start the exercise with a scaled space and are provided a base file, you already know that of course, and to use the correct units. Oh, let me stop right there. I almost forgot a step. You should always check your units, whether you start a new file or even get one from, say, a professor. You should always check your units. Well, how do I do that? This program is pretty intuitive. I'm just going to type in units, enter. Awesome. It's actually going to give me the units of my file, right? Keep in mind, if I open up another file, it could have different units and things like this. Another reason Rhinoceros is pretty awesome is that it has every unit known to man. In fact, it has ones that honestly have never even been measured. Nobody's measured a light year, by the way. But it has light years and that distance and what it is. In fact, it even has parsecs. I still don't really know what that is besides a Star Trek term. But I've never used it. In our case, of course, we'll be using inches, feet, miles, and to be fair, for 3D printing, millimeters or laser cutting in millimeters. By default, those machines use millimeters, and most machine tooling uses millimeters. So it's definitely something that we use quite often, is our units. In my case, I'm going to put it in feet because that is what is required of the assignment. However, we can double check and verify that yes, we are in feet. However, when you type in a line or type line and hit enter, you'll notice that I can type in 5 inches anyway, right? And of course it's going to make a 5-inch line literally to scale, right? Now what's important about the digital realm is that we don't actually do anything to scale like we would in drafting, right? Don't get me wrong, one of the first questions in drafting is, sir, ma'am, what scale are we drawing in? And they'll usually say 1/4 scale, 1/8 scale, 1/16 scale, 1/32 scale, 3/32 scale, all those kinds of things. In the digital realm, we only make one scale. Can anybody guess? Cole, you got this one? We only make it 1:1. Thank you, Cole. We only make the object the true size that it is. So if you're modeling a solar system, you're going to use light years, right? If you're modeling a building, you're going to use feet. If you're modeling a city, you're going to use miles, right? And you're going to make it true to the object. Now, funny enough, it's going to look the same size on the computer, but the computer now understands how big something actually is. And the reason we do that is because, well, in studio, how many times does your professor change the scale on you? Right? Sometimes in the mid-battle, right? I mean, they're like, I want a 1/8 model. Wait, I lied. I want 1/16. And you're like, I already started making it, right? So don't get me wrong. What's nice about this program is I can simply shrink it or make it larger, and suddenly I don't have to do anything, right? Or at least a lot less work in terms of scaling. So just keep that in mind. For the next part of the assignment though, we'll start off with a box of 25 by 25 by 25 feet. Then, following the vague instructions, I quite literally put it in my instructions, below to show our steps in the diagram. The point of this exercise will be to use the Rhino 3D space effectively and to show the manipulations that you apply in a communicative step-by-step diagram. The manipulations themselves aren't really important to the design like any other design, but how the manipulations are displayed. A minimum of 3 steps must be shown in an isometric view. The final diagram will be composed of on an 11 by 17 piece of paper and pen to Miro. Since the final object is not what is important, think sculptural composition. So if you've ever had Chronodal or myself, very often we make you make an abstract model. This is really the abstract model that we're talking about. Keep in mind, this isn't a real project, and more or less, I'd like you to design a diagram. How many of you guys have ever put together IKEA furniture? Anybody? Well, hilariously, there's a little guy on the front that looks like this. He has a question mark on his head, and it says, call IKEA. However, it doesn't use English. It uses little icons. Why? Because that diagram is used for anybody in any country, and everybody has a different language, sometimes 2, 3 different languages, and it's more efficient to talk in actually a symbol-like pattern, right? How many of you guys have ever built Legos? Is there paragraphs on every page? No. In fact, sometimes it just shows like a little brick and you're like, where the hell is that brick? Right? You're like sitting there looking for it, and actually they gave you like a weird view of it, so you're like, oh, this must be the piece I was looking for. Well, it would have been great if you showed me the other side of the piece. I would have known that a little bit better. So keep in mind, what I'm actually asking for here is a Lego diagram or an IKEA diagram. I want you to almost teach a 5-year-old how to make a bowl of cereal, right? Which doesn't mean we're going to start off with the cereal, right? You don't just start pouring the cereal. Oh, crap. I need the bowl. I need to maybe even show the tools that I need first, right? I need to show the spoon, the carton of milk, the bowl, and maybe the box of cereal. And I can even start to show plus signs and equal signs and minus signs, right? Hold the sugar, right, on the Frosted Flakes and things like this. I don't know about you, but I used to have cornflakes. I used to live with a 102-year-old grandfather, and all we ate was cornflakes, but not like the sugary ones. I mean, we had to like sit there and like put the rice and the sugar. Is anybody old school like that? I was very poor growing up. But anyway, it's all about the step-by-step process that we're actually trying to make here. So at least for this object, you're trying to break down for the user, what does it look like? How is it actually put together? Yes, here are my vague instructions, and don't worry, I've given us a little bit of help visually. I'm a visual learner myself. I kind of have to see what the professor is trying to say in order to get a better idea of what to do. However, don't let yourself stop there if you're a visual learner. Of course, still read it. And of course, we'll do it step by step, and we'll probably get into Illustrator actually Tuesday, right? This may be a 2-part exercise just because, yeah, it's only 9 o'clock. We have about till 10 o'clock, or at least till 9:30. But let's go ahead and get started. So first things first, it says make a 25 by 25 by 25 box. So let's go ahead and do that. In my case, I like to stay very organized. There's that floor plan I was looking for. Get out of here. Anyway, maybe now I can get rid of it? No? Well, if you do really need to get rid of something, I'm going to go ahead and purge it. Basically purge, yeah, just like the movie, it gets rid of anything that is unuseful. So there you go. However, be very careful. If you had things unlocked and you weren't using them and you actually needed them, but you were just hiding them, purge does get rid of them. So be very careful. However, if you notice your file size is 8.6 gigabytes, then you might need to purge something, right? And you're noticing that, yeah, your file's not working so great. One thing I would probably express that, don't get me wrong, I do stuff in the tutorial that you probably shouldn't do in practice. I'm doing it for the sake of speed and obviously for tutorial ease. But don't try to do every single assignment in one Rhino file, right? It's okay to make a duplicate file and even delete what you have and start the next exercise. The reason I say this is because some computers, they can't really handle all that information, right? My computer is okay. I can probably do pretty much every assignment in one Rhino file. However, what happens if that Rhino file gets corrupt? Suddenly, all of my exercises, all my project files are gone, which is not great. And it does happen at least once a semester that a file gets corrupt and suddenly, sir, ma'am, I didn't save anything. I didn't save it in 2 places like you tell us to always do, right? Always save it to your computer and some sort of cloud or even a flash drive or external hard drive. Seriously. God forbid, poor Professor Tunks had his laptop stolen one time. Luckily, literally right out of his apartment, not luckily, but luckily he actually had everything on an external hard drive and a cloud, and he was up and running by the end of the day, right? However, he had 25 years of work on there, literally everything that he ever owned, ever did in architecture school, and you guarantee he's not going back to architecture school just to do that again, right? So again, this starts to become very serious, guys. Nobody wants to do Studio One twice, right? Or any studio twice, right? Especially if you had certain professors. But that being the case, what I'm trying to say is, of course, be organized and try to make some good habits from the very beginning. Obviously, when I was teaching myself in 2 weeks, I made no good habits. I was going for, bottom line, just get it done. But in our case, I'm going to make a new layer and call it my organizing layer. Of course, I'm going to spell that wrong. That's okay for today. Like I said, don't do what I do. But in my case, I do want to stay organized. So what I like to do is make it organized. In my case, I'm going to start with a rectangle. And I don't want it to be orange. So I don't know why I got rid of my layer, but technically speaking, I could redo if I didn't already start making another one. Where'd it go? There we go. So double click on a layer to basically enact it. You can usually double click on the name itself, and clearly screen recording kind of gets messed up on mine, so I accidentally clicked too many buttons, and you'll notice that some of my things don't pop up. I have to actually restart my program because I'm screen recording. So I'm going to save that real quick, close my Rhino. You shouldn't have to do this. Obviously, you're not screen recording while you're working on these programs. But my visual card, it does get a little fickle, especially if I have a bunch of stuff open. Let me close Brave and things like that. Not a big problem. It should come back, I hope, so that when I right click on something, yeah, there it is. Awesome. So just in case you ever have a problem like that, just keep in mind computers aren't perfect. But I'm going to call that organizing layer. Awesome. I'm going to make it the color red, double click, and make it red. So in my case, I'm going to type in rectangle and just kind of more or less just stay organized, right? In fact, in my case, I'm going to make a step 1, step 2. In my case, I'm also going to type in text. Yes, all you got to do is type in text, enter, and it gives you a text box. So I'm going to say step 1. And I can choose the font here, the size, and all kinds of things. In my case, I could also just use Gumball and fake it till I make it, right? In my case, I know that I'm going to have at least 4 steps. So I'm going to start with 1, 2, 3, and 4. Obviously, I can double click on that text again and change it. Step 3. But again, as you can imagine in a studio project or any project, right? Things can get pretty chaos. You have how many of you guys that have used Rhino before? Your Rhino model was like this over here, this over there, something way up here, something way down there, and you had this like digital space of like a universe going on. And definitely the best thing to do is to stay organized or break them apart, right? Not everything has to be in the same Rhino file. In fact, you can always add a Rhino file to another Rhino file, which we may or may not get into later. It's not really super important, and it's actually pretty easy. Just drag it in. But in our case, I do like to stay organized, but it does take a little bit more time. And let me tell you, the future you will thank you, right? Because I love running into some of my past files and going, man, Chris was chaotic in the past, right? I really wish he was helping out future Chris. And now some of the stuff that I've done, I've worked at SAC for 8 years. My goodness, I've set up some really good stuff to where I've really eliminated the amount of time that I spend making assignments or making phone calls and doing all these things that I do in my practice. But help your future self, right, to say the very least. But we got all of our steps. Let's start off with that 25 by 25 by 25 box. How do I make a box? Well, I'm just going to type in box. Some of you guys got that question wrong on the on the pop quiz, but that's okay too. In my case, I'm going to make a new layer and call it box layer. In my case, I'm going to make it purple just because none of these colors are actually super important, but they're really just for visual aid. And since I don't see very well, this visual aid is kind of nice. I'm going to double click on box to enact that layer. And it's going to ask me for a few things. It's going to say the first corner of the box. So I'm going to click. And it's going to be like, okay, well, how big do you want the box? Well, in my case, I'm going to type in 25 foot symbol, right? So there is a difference between the foot symbol and the inch symbol, right? The foot symbol is 1 tack, whereas the inch symbol is 2 tacks, right? Also, I could just type in feet, right? So if I really just didn't know where that button was, I could just type in feet. Miles, I could type in parsecs. Doesn't really matter. It's going to stay in the same units, but still make that measurement, right? In my case, I can type in feet. Awesome. So it's like, okay, now the Y direction. Well, 25 feet, enter. Now the Z direction, right? And I'm going to do 25 feet, enter. Voila, I've got a box, right? Which, of course, voila in French means here you are, right? But in this case, now we have our 25 by 25 by 25 box. Awesome. How do I verify that, though? Well, I can click on it, and I can type in what. I know, super intuitive. I type in what, literally brings up this little window that tells me everything about this object. In fact, it'll tell me where it is, how many points it has, and exactly how big it is, right? Everything like that. It tells you if it's a valid extrusion, a valid geometry, all stuff that will eventually become pretty important as we dive into the digital realm. But that being the case, all right, step 1, check. Man, what do I do next? Well, subdivide that box into 9. So a 3 by 3 grid on all sides. So let me show you what I mean by that. In our case, I don't want to start here and just, don't get me wrong, I need to show all my steps for this assignment. So, well, when in doubt, I'm going to use what the digital realm does best. It makes a copy. So I'm going to type in copy. In fact, I'm going to use my same geometry there and click it there. I'm going to turn off ortho because that's super annoying. But I'm always going to make a copy because, well, the original, I might have done a lot of work to do that. In this case, not so much. But I may have actually done like 3 days of work. And you better believe I'm not just going to like continue on that thing. I'm going to make a copy just in case I mess up on the next step. I can always go back to my last step and I'd save myself 3 days of work. Does that make sense, guys? Hopefully so. But in our case, we'll make a copy for step 2, and we'll start subdividing it. To be fair, we could just like subdivide something, but you know, I want to show you the many different ways. Like I said, there's like 15 different ways to do the same thing, so I'll show you at least 2, right, to say the very least. But in our case, I need to subdivide this, and you'll notice it's not quite focused on the object, right? So in my case, I'm going to click on that object and zoom select. Awesome. Now it's going to completely focus on my object. In my case, I'm holding down the right click of my mouse button, right, and moving around, right? Keep that in mind that having a mouse is the best thing to do for this program. If you're on a trackpad, go ahead and stop and don't make a bad habit. The reason I say this is for 2 reasons. Trackpads suck, first of all, and there's stuff you just literally can't do in a trackpad, such as the middle button. Uh-oh, you're suddenly not even working at the most efficient level that you can. Second of all, if you have a professor like Kernodle or myself that's proficient in these programs, we can't help you on a trackpad. In fact, Kernodle will just laugh at you. He'll walk away laughing, right? But in my case, I'll get a little kind of ticked off and be like, stop using a trackpad and please get a mouse. You can go to Goodwill, you can get a wired one for $5, right? However, if you forget your mouse, it happens all the time, I do as well. You can always unplug the school mouse. I didn't tell you this. You can always unplug the school mouse, plug it into yours, and plug it back into the school computer once you're finished, right? The important step there is plugging it back into the computer. I can't tell you how many times I've pissed off Boslav by not accidentally plugging it back in. He's sit there, so, Chris, do you know what's... Yes, it's not plugged in, right? So in our case, just be proficient in that area. Please get a mouse. I know Amazon Day comes a few times a year. Definitely a good time to get one. You don't have to have a fancy $75 mouse like myself. In fact, you can get this one for about $35 on eBay if you're just really lucky. I prefer a trackball because I've had a trackball since 1995. Those were the first mouse. But you guys remember the ball at the end of the mouse? Now we see who actually is that old, right? But I remember taking that thing out and like hitting it on the ground. Anyway, a lot of good times being 5 years old. But anyway, we have our second step. Let's make some lines and start subdividing this thing. So in my case, I'm just going to type in line and really start drawing. I might actually need a couple of different views for this one, right? So here's my second step, and here's my second step again. If that C-plane is really getting in the way, you can also type in C-plane and reorient it. So for instance, if I'm in this view, and obviously it's because of the perspective view, obviously I should just turn that back to the right view, no pun intended. But you can always move your C-plane too. You can always move that 0, point just in case it's in the way. I find that it does get in the way sometimes visually. Like that, for instance, I hate like when my step is like in there. Sometimes I'll just actually take all of it and just move it outside of there because it's just easier to look at for me. But that's just me. That's my personal preference. But in our case, let's go ahead and subdivide this thing. So let's draw some lines. And in my case, I'm going to draw that line. Now, I don't need to do that over and over again. So, and don't get me wrong, I really like the golden ratio, so I might use something that I know. I don't even have to do that again. In fact, I'll copy it and I'll rotate it. Of course, thankfully, since Gumball, I can hold shift and it's going to keep it in a 90-degree format. If I don't hold shift, it'll rotate it. Please keep it orthogonal, right? No diagonals for now. Don't worry, we'll get fancy with the spices soon enough. But this is what I mean by a 9 or a 3x3 grid. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Awesome. Now let's do that to our X, Y, and Z planes, right? I don't necessarily have to do that again, but if I wanted to shape things up, I could, right? And get a little fancy with the spices. Maybe I want some hierarchy of like a small, medium, and a large, right? So that's okay. I'll take that piece again and see what it looks like. Well, it's at the floor of the model. Maybe I actually want it at the top. After all, I'm going to have to make a diagram, and maybe I want to potentially show myself cutting into this piece to show off how I subdivided the object. Keep in mind, this is what we're focused on for this assignment, not really how great or bad the object looks. To be fair, we've gotten some crazy results and I love it, right? But that being the case, remember that the more crazy the geometry, the more crazy the math, right? Just keep that in mind. Not all math works, right? Don't get me wrong, math is taught like it's reality. We can use it to help us in reality, But I can math Superman and how fast he should be going, but that doesn't make Superman real. Does that make sense? So don't get me wrong, there's stuff we can do in this program that isn't technically physically possible in reality, right? So keep that in mind. I love digital realms, but they are limited, at least for now. Now, VR is, of course, slowly changing some things, but we'll get into that actually a little bit later. We might actually get into some VR and walk around our projects, but we'll see if we get that far. Anyway, I don't want to do that all over again, so I'm going to make a copy, again, what the computer does best. I'm going to make a copy, I'm going to put it off to the side. I'm going to take that copy, go to another view, or just stay in this view, and rotate it. Awesome. Now that I have that view, there it is. There's my elevation, and there's the cuts that I want to make. I kind of want to change it up though. So, I don't know, maybe that one's a little bit smaller, and maybe that one's a little bit more to the golden ratio. Maybe I line things up, maybe I don't, doesn't really matter. But in my case, I need to subdivide this thing into basically 27 squares, right? So 9, 9, and 9, right? So you may have actually noticed you'll only need 2 sides because that will get the 3rd side, right? Anyway, so let's go over our first wonderful command called wire cut, which is possibly my favorite tool. However, I might want to show this, so I don't want to get rid of it per se. So I'm going to get that pretty close because I realize that's going to make a pretty cool diagram actually. In fact, let me just show you real quick. If I take that and I make 2D, I can get that exact view pretty nicely, in fact, right? It even has step 2 in there. Get out of here. But I can make that view and you'll notice that it's actually 2-dimensional. It's flat, right? As you can see, I need to zoom select it. But relatively speaking, we can make any 3-dimensional view flat. I know it's a game changer, especially for any of us who have been in Design 1 or Design 2, and you had to sit there, you had to calculate all the view, you had to make sure the vanishing points were correct, you had to make all these things correct, and it still didn't come out correct, right? The computer does that literally in seconds, right? And it is a great tool. However, we'll get into it more. But I may want to use that for my diagram, right? So in my case, I don't get rid of anything. In fact, I'll just make another step. And I'll call it step 2.1. After all, I'd like to keep everything. And I may very well need it. So I'm going to keep that step the way it is, showing it before it gets sliced, and show this one actually being sliced. So in my case, let's go ahead and wire cut, enter, and cut the object. Wire cut is basically, if you guys remember 5th grade art class and you had a big clump of clay and they got a wire and they basically cut that clay, that wire basically decided where the clay got cut, right? If I held the wire at a certain angle, it was going to cut the clay at that angle as well. In our case, this is our wire and this is our clay. I'm going to hit enter and it's going to go, well, how far do you want to cut, Christopher? Well, I want to cut all the way through the object, and in this case, it doesn't really matter which side I want to go, but it's going to ask me something. Hey, do you want us to delete stuff or do you want us to keep it all? In my case, I want to make sure that keep all is there because I want to keep everything, but it doesn't really matter which side I click. Now I have a subdivided object, right? Awesome. There, that clay has been cut twice. Let's do it again using this one. So wire cut, or I could just hit space bar because it enacts the same command. And let's cut that one straight through and to this side. Awesome. We already have 3 separate boxes. Well, I could continue. Let's see. Maybe I can get this one going. Let's see if I could do 2 at the same time. Do you think it'll work? Spoiler alert, doesn't work. I'll select all 3. I'll try and cut 2. It'll kind of look like it's going to work. And, well, maybe it might actually work. Let's see. And no, well, it got one of them. So, I mean, not the end of the world. But just keep in mind, wire cut typically does have to be pretty much 1 wire at a time, right? Obviously, sometimes I'll do stuff on purpose wrong because, well, you're going to run into some things that are weird as you learn this program too. And it's better to be a little bit more proactive and troubleshoot what's going on, right? So often I like to make some mistakes on purpose. That way I can show you how to get out of it, right? And to be fair, it took me 2 weeks to get out of it. Hopefully it'll only take you 2 minutes, right? You won't have to do what Professor Verret did. Sit there forever trying to get things to work. But wire cut can work on multiple pieces of clay. So I'll go straight through and out and we can of course cut it. We'll take that other piece, wire cut, 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 all the way through and all the way out. Awesome. So far so good. It looks like we still need 2 more lines. Obviously we don't need those lines anymore. So maybe since we didn't even use them, I'll delete them from my diagram. Obviously don't want to show too much, right? Or at least stuff that I didn't actually use. We'll wire cut it again, but in my case, you'll notice something. It works just like any other AutoCAD program, but if I select something and I go to the left, it'll select everything that it touches, right? So anything that touches that box, it's gonna get it, right? It's gonna highlight it and select it. However, if you'll notice I click and I go to the right, it's only gonna select the things that are completely in the box. So for instance, quick guess, do you think it's gonna capture anything there? Maybe that middle box. Hey, there you go. It only got the items that were in that box, and that's because I was going to the right. Don't get me wrong, if this is absolutely confusing, it'll become second nature like playing the piano. But of course, nobody just gets up to a piano and suddenly plays it. You have to practice, and you have to practice perfectly in order to start doing the right thing. But in my case, I do need to select all of them. So I went to the left and just made sure something was touching the box. In my case, let's go ahead and wire cut that again. So wire cut, enter, this one. I'm gonna go straight up and all the way across, and lovely. Don't actually need the top boxes in this case now. And as you can see, I'm kinda panning around. You'll notice that I have to hit shift and I can pan. If I don't hold shift, I rotate. If you're just absolutely out in the middle of nowhere, wacky doodle is what I like to call it. Usually I select my object again, and again, zoom select. That's gonna always kind of recenter the focus of the object that you wanna look at. Can't tell you, I really wish somebody would have told me that in the first year of understanding Rhino. I didn't know that for like a whole year. I was sitting there like, trying to pan stuff, trying to get where, and it just take forever, right? Now you can do it in seconds. So, let's get all those pieces. Again, everything was touching that box as I was going to the left. Notice that it won't do that if I go to the right. Nothing. It'll only select everything that is in that box. And by the way, it selects everything in the box, right? So be very careful, especially highlighting or selecting something in these 3-dimensional views. Sometimes you kind of have to rotate the view a little bit in order to actually get the right thing that you want, right? So in my case, I've got those pieces. Could have swore I got that line. Oh, I guess I didn't do it. I accidentally hit undo, I guess. Let's try it again. We'll get all those. And keep in mind, it's only going to wire cut things that are able to be wire cut. So you can't even really mess up. Why? Because we have edit undo. There's no such thing as messing up. How many of you guys are afraid of messing up when you were drafting, right? Absolutely terrified. You get one line wrong, you'd be like, God, flip your desk, right? The good news is we have edit undo, right? So I'm going to wire cut again. Sorry this step is taking so long. I do really want to be thorough and show you how the program works. Don't want to leave you in the dust or constantly pausing my video just to understand what's going on. So wire cut again, spacebar. Awesome. In my case, I'm going to make sure I go down and, oh man, I messed up. That's okay. Try again. Let's make sure I get all my pieces. First, you got to tell it what you want to cut first, right? Spacebar, wire cut, make sure I go all the way down and all the way through. And voila, we have our 27 box, right? Not too shabby. To be absolutely honest with you guys, at any other school you go to, the professor's not going to do this with you. They're just going to hand you the directions and go, we'll talk about it next Friday. Good luck. Right? And you'll kind of just be on your own, right? And of course you'll have your other students, you'll have a teacher assistant that sometimes records things, not all the time. Sometimes they'll just give you a link, here you go. In fact, we have a professor here that does that. I'm like, no dude, you gotta show them, don't just throw a link there, like you're letting that guy teach them, like come on. Anyway, but in our case, I've already done this step, so well, I'm gonna copy the part that I need, right? Because I'm not gonna do that all over again. I'm gonna go to the left this time. That way I can get everything that's in that box, right? Not everything that's touching the box. Again, I'll copy it. I'll use a similar point, right? So I can copy it from that point. And all right, let's move on to step 3. Okay, that doesn't sound too hard. Remove 3 or 4 pieces. Psh, easy, right? Let's remove 3 or 4 pieces. Wait, I kind of want to show this step by step though, right? This would be the equivalent of like, well, don't get me wrong. How many of you guys, when you make a bowl of cereal, does anybody eat cereal still? I still sometimes do. I'm a sucker for those Reese's peanut butter cups, but I don't know about you, but I add the cereal first, then the milk. Is there anybody who's the opposite? They put the milk first and then the cereal? You're crazy. No, I'm just kidding. But my brother does it that way. He's left-handed. We're just like always opposites. I'm like, dude, that just seems wrong, right? You know, like how do you know how much cereal to put? The ratio is going to be completely off, right? And you're not even going to get it like a little like, I don't know about you, but like get it a little soggy, right? Don't leave it there too long. But everybody has a different way of how they make something, right? Even grandma or abuela, you know, she said like, no, mijo, like you got to do something to the lard first before you put it in the tortilla, right? And she's got the skill, right, if you will, and that is what made it so good. But in our case, the same thing could be said for our diagrams and architecture. You want to show those things step by step, and you want to make sure that it's right. So in my case, maybe that's actually the one I use. Maybe that's actually the one I use. What's the difference? Well, one shows the cut already, right? Maybe I put a little scissor diagram and oh, now the 5-year-old understands, hey, they're cutting it. I get it, right? I don't have to type out a paragraph that goes, this is what I did and this is how I'm going to do it. Nobody reads those things anyway, right? However, just in case I mess up, right? I want to show what I'm actually doing. So in my case, I already have this step here, so I don't need to make another copy. I don't need to make a step 3.1 yet. But I do need to remove 3 or 4 pieces. To be fair, I didn't really say what defines a piece here. So in my case, maybe this is a piece. Awesome. That'll be my piece, right? Piece number 2, I don't know. This guy down here and that one. Why not? And piece number 3, I mean, I don't want to get rid of too much here. That one looks pretty good. I'm going to remove piece number 3. And piece number 4, let's change up the other side, I guess. Without getting rid of too much, let's get rid of this middle piece and that piece. Awesome. I'm going to move that up. Sweet. So we have our final object. Not too bad. Looking actually somewhat architectural. How many of you guys like already see the potential of mass modeling in studio, right? I mean, how many times is your professor like, here, make me a mass model, and you're sitting there like for 3 hours trying to like fold a box or make little pieces, and don't get me wrong, they're beautiful, I know, but my goodness, all I have to do is go, render, bam, I've got a piece and now it has shade and shadow and everything. There's my entire project. I'm going to print it out and I'm going to sketch on it anyway. Here you go, professor. Just like that. I can use actually both. Because what we have the advantage of, especially at San Antonio College, guys, we know how to draw, especially if we had Escamilla, Nick Risen, or myself for freehand 1 or 2, right? In fact, we're encouraging these things all the time. You don't have to stop here. You can stop here, in fact. Say this is the the utmost ability of your Rhino ability. Awesome. Pick the right view, right? So, okay, I'm going to do a 2-point perspective. That's going to be my building. I'm going to take a screenshot, and I'm going to print that out and draw all over it. So again, we can already use this tool on day 1, right, to say the very least. But let's go back to the assignment. I'm going to go back to shaded view. Hopefully you saw how I did that. It's not really important yet, but we won't really need rendered view yet. We're going to stick to 2D and lines. But for us, we've already removed this, and don't get me wrong, I might want to use this as my step. In fact, I may realize I can draw some pretty cool stuff. I can get some lines going on here. I can connect them to where they actually connect to. So for instance, I'm not going to do that again over and over. I'm going to use my O snap, and you'll see that, well, at least the screen recording is trying to get rid of it, but there should be a little text box that comes up. It won't disappear like that for you. It disappears like that for me because I'm recording. But it's going to line up to these things. You'll see if I don't have end on, it's going to be like, is this what you mean? Is this what you mean? Of course, Smart Track is trying to help us too. So, but my goodness, if I wanted to make an exploded axon diagram, done, just like that, right? To say the very least. Probably too many lines there. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a bit much. But let's say I want to make 2D, right? Done, just like that. However, this is the piece in question, at least for the next step, as I need to apply a wire cut or a Boolean operation to 4 of the any remaining pieces. That's kind of a key word I forgot there. The remaining piece is what I want you to apply something to. So in our case, let's go ahead and do so. And I need to take this piece that I need and want. So I'm going to go towards the right and get that. You'll notice again, if I go to the left, it's only going to get the stuff that hits the box. So I'm going to take that piece, copy, of course what digital realms do best, and go on to step 4. After all, I need to explain what's going on, so I might actually make another step with this one. In my case, it's not, like I said, it's not really important the object or what object you use. Today I'll use a sphere or, I don't know, a cone pyramid or something. In our case, we actually have some presets. You'll notice if you go to the box tool and you click on it and hold click, it actually has a few objects and 3-dimensional platonic solids that we can use in this program. They're not exactly great, but for instance, if I needed to make a cone, I could decide the circle and the cone, and bam, you know, we got a cone. To be fair, there's a lot of ways to make a cone, but that's probably definitely the easiest way. Arguably, there's even like more ways to use. You can make different boxes, different graduated cylinders, different spheres, and all these kinds of things. You can even, if you really like the circle tool, you can even add it to your toolbox, right? And put it on there. Of course, mine will be fickle today because I'm screen recording, but you get the idea. Obviously, you can put it in your own tabs, either on the side tab or even actually on Windows. You can put it on the top tab too. I don't think you can do that in, oh, well, you can kind of do that in Macintosh, but it kind of gets rid of a lot of real estate there. Unfortunately, you can't just edit undo that, by the way, so be very careful. In my case, I'm just going to try and drag it back to where it is. Of course, you can exit as well, and it's still technically there, right? So anyway, just explaining some things. But since I have another operation, you know, I kind of want to switch things up and say Boolean operation. After all, I want to stay organized. So bool operation. And I don't know, I'll use the color red to kind of signify subtraction. And I don't know, I'll go with either a sphere. Sphere is actually one of the hardest ones to do. So I kind of want to do that one just in case you want to do that too. Double click on the layer first, spacebar, and then of course make a new object. So in our case, it says to basically apply a wire cut or a Boolean operation to this. Now let me show you the second way of what I mean. So let's say I wanted to do the wire cut first. I'm already pretty used to wire cut. I've already tried Boolean difference. It was giving me a headache, so I want to try the wire cut, right? In my case, let's try that with a circle. You'll see that we can use closed or open objects in order to use a wire cut. We've already used an open object, which is a line, right? It's not closed in on itself, right? Whereas a circle is, of course, closed, right? Technically speaking. But in our case, let's say I make a circle, rotate it, and I wire cut through at least 4 of these pieces. Now, to be fair, you can wire cut through as many as you like, but for the sake of argument, that's not the best view to look at. I mean, it looks like I'm hitting all 4, but that might not actually be the case, right? So I'll go to one of my other views and go, it's not hitting anything, right? So of course I'll make it a little bit bigger and make sure that it's going to cut through a couple of things. In my case, I'd probably make a copy first, right, before I do these operations. After all, I want to show how I'm doing these things, and I may want to show how the cereal gets poured in first before the milk, right? So in my case, let's go ahead and wire cut that whole thing. Select the clay first, right? So in my case, sometimes I like to get the top view, or just kind of, you can always just go to the viewport too, but I don't mind just kind of fiddling around sometimes. Wire cut, enter. There's the wire cut that I want. Now it's like, oh man, that's not the direction I'm hoping for. I actually want to go straight through the object. You'll notice that we can control the direction of the wire cut as well. So if we click here, let's try Y. Oh, there's the direction I needed, right? So I want to cut straight through. Awesome. And as you can see, it kind of left the object because I still said keep all objects. However, for this sake, I might actually want to show what I removed in that step-by-step, right? So I'm going to take that whole piece and put it right there. In fact, maybe I even want to show it as red. So So I'm going to right click and change object layer. Kind of looking like the Smash Bros icon for a second, but as you can see, there's the final object. Okay, so again, it's not so much about the design here as it is much more about the process. Now, I've really gone over on time. I really would like about an hour to start helping with some of these things. Some of you guys are probably already done with the entire assignment, and that's cool too. However, bear with me. Let's give it about 20 more minutes and we'll get out a little bit early. Is there a question already?
Yeah.
Yes.
So for like the lines to get the grid, mine keep showing diagonal on the front and side elevations. How do you make them like stick the top layer instead of
I'm not sure I quite exactly know what you mean.
like I'll show you.
It's a good question, but let's leave it till the end.
Okay.
Just because it seems a little bit more specific than just kind of like how do you do this. But definitely a good question. Please don't forget it. Write it down if you must. You might actually figure it out by the time I'm done with this anyway. But because you have had some practice. I know a lot of us, this isn't our first day. But great question. We can definitely get to it at the end. But for the sake of the assignment, let's just kind of more or less kind of go what I'm going for here. So I'm going to draw another rectangle, and I'm going to show it in my organization box. I want to do actually 11 feet by 17 feet to keep that ratio. And I can always gumball it and hold shift to maintain that ratio. However, this is more or less my 11 by 17 piece of paper, and I want to show my steps, right? However, it says that I need them in an isometric view, and to be fair, there's all kinds of views. In fact, there's 1,000 just right there, just moving around, right? So I may want a very specific view, and I can, right? So if I hit that down arrow in perspective, and I go to set view, I can actually get an isometric view, right? If I select northeast, in fact, I can get pretty close. However, I don't know, it's not the best view in order to look at the object, right? In fact, I may want to twist it a little bit. That way I can get that little square and I can start to see the three-dimensionality of the object rather than actually 6 triangles in 2D, right? So that might be actually the best view for us. Awesome. I'm going to go ahead and make 2D. Enter. And there is a couple of options here. One of the most important ones is actually to maintain source layers. I mean, you did all that work in organizing the layers, you might as well maintain those source layers. Otherwise, it's going to smash it down to a default, right? In our case, I want to group the output, especially if I had a million of something. You don't want a million points, you want them to be all in one object. In our case, I'm going to hit apply for today and see that I got my box. Awesome. I'm going to move it out of the way for now. And I'm just going to pan. Don't accidentally rotate. If you accidentally rotate, it's going to change the view. And I want each of my steps to actually be a somewhat consistent view. I wouldn't show this side and then this side and that side and this side. It's going to really confuse the user of what I'm trying to show. So I want to maintain that view, and you know what? I don't think that one's winning. I think that one's definitely winning for today. So I'm going to take that whole piece and make 2D. Awesome. It's maintained my exact settings. I'm going to hit apply. It's going to take a little bit longer because there's more stuff there. But there's step number 2. Awesome. Let's go on to step number 3. That's looking pretty sweet actually, but some stuff still might be in the way. So, oh, don't accidentally do it that way. Don't accidentally turn it. Make sure, of course, you get the right one. Obviously, I don't want it to cover my object so much, so I just want to get a little bit out. And that one's kind of already covered by this object, so again, I kind of want to move it out just a little bit, not rotate it. Again, you can't mess up. Control Z is your best friend. But that looks like at least a decent amount of space there, and that's pretty already far out. And to be fair, I'm going to add these in Illustrator anyway, so I don't really need those as well. So I'm going to take that whole piece, make 2D, enter, and apply. There's step 3. Man, I'm already saving myself so much time. Can you imagine if I had to draft all this? Anyway, we got step 3, and last but not least, we have step 4. I may want to show this step and this step. I'm not sure. Maybe kind of show like a hierarchy and show like the final product being the biggest one. And I may even want to not show this view, right? That might not actually be the best view of my object. So I may want to switch it up. I'm not sure yet. Maybe I actually show this one little and then show a separate view of my Make 2D. So Make 2D, enter. And we'll take that as my step 4. Now I'm going to move back to my top view, and if this is my piece of paper, right, I'm going to show them in order, right? Step 1, step 2. Now obviously I want to see what you can come up with in terms of diagramming. And to be fair, there's a lot of different ways we can diagram the exact same thing, right? In my case, I like to line up my boxes to make it easier for the user. Also, this box step isn't exactly important, right? So I'm going to make them a lot smaller, right? Because, well, I don't know, maybe I don't want the user to quite necessarily focus on that. And by the way, we're not to any scale or anything like that yet. I'm going to move this one as well, and maybe say that's my step 3. Maybe step 1, step 2, step 3, I don't know. But I definitely want to move it around here and do any of the drawing that I might need to do here rather than in Illustrator. It's kind of one of my main rules to never draw in Illustrator because it is awful and inaccurate and way easier in Rhino, AutoCAD, and Revit even arguably. So that's looking still pretty good, but I still might actually want a final shot, right? So maybe I want step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4 right at the top. Let me move that again. Again, you can't mess up. Edit, undo, right? And I don't know, maybe step 1, 2, 3, 4, and then a final shot, right? And there's nothing in the directions I said I couldn't do the final shot. So I'm going to go back to my perspective view, and I'm going to say set view to, I don't know, 2-point perspective. Maybe I am trying to show off something a little bit more architectural. I'm going to focus on my object, and in fact, it's still kind of a loose object, if you will. So in my case, I'm going to zoom select that so it's a little easier to focus on. And as you can see, 2-point perspective really adds some drama, to say the very least. So if that's a little confusing or just absolutely making you sick, you can always switch it back, right, to just a regular perspective, which is known as an orthogonal perspective, by the way. But let's take that piece and let's either group it or Boolean union them, right? So I did mention this was like the wire cut way. Let's see what you can do with the Boolean way as well, right? So just for giggles, right? Let's cut this up. Obviously, you don't need to do both, wire cut and Boolean difference, just one or the other. But this could be actually pretty interesting too, right? Honestly, it's going to cut through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 objects, so I think we meet the requirements there. But essentially, I want to take everything. I'm going to hold Shift and unclick. Oh, sorry. It's Command in Rhino. Or sorry, in Macintosh. It's Control in Windows. Did you have a question?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
What's
Boolean is basically a fancy mathematical term for addition, subtraction, division, and multiplication in 3-dimensional space. It's not really a huge word, but just know that you type in the word boo, as in like boo, I scared you, and those Boolean commands come up, right? So watch. As I type in Boolean,
Yeah, there were like
we get a couple of them, right? And in our case, to be fair, some of them technically kind of do the same thing, just in different ways. In our case, I'm going to use Boolean split because, well, I want to take one 3-dimensional object and I want to minus another one. So in my case, I want to split those two, and maybe I want to end up with the piece that's left over. Maybe I don't. Doesn't really matter in this case. But let's Boolean split, enter, and it's going to say, hey, what do you want to split it with? This one, right? And guess what it did?
also like it
It cuts it right out.
takes. Okay.
But it leaves the object there. So in my case, I may want to actually either keep it or delete it. But my goodness, there's practically an architecture project right there. See what I mean?
Thanks.
Absolutely. Good question. Just right before I did it. Right. But in this case, as you can see, Boolean difference and wire cut are kind of do two different things, even though they both subtracted from the object. Right? Definitely not a bad question. But like I said, maybe I want a final shot of this object that maybe is different from the diagram that I chose. Keep in mind that Make 2D is only going to make 2D of the object that I selected. So if I forget a box, oops, it's not going to make 2D it, right? Maybe I want to keep all that, and don't get me wrong, there's a lot of hidden lines in there that maybe I may or may not want to show. Eventually, you'll be required to, by the way. But that actually shows off the space of the object a little bit better to me, right? So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I'm going to dial it in just right. I kind of like the space right there. It kind of shows off everything that's going on. And I'm going to type in Make 2D. You'll notice if I enact hidden lines, oh man, this is about to be a game changer, right? Because again, if I were to draft this, it would have taken me all day, right? However, rightfully so. If I hit apply, it usually does actually take a little bit longer. I guess today, not so much. But voila, it's even got every hidden line, and it's even separated it by layer just for us, right? If I zoom select on that, my goodness, right? It even shows the hidden lines as a gray already. And it has grouped each object, so keep that in mind. But maybe that's my final shot. So I'm going to move that, and I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. Right? After all, not too bad. Bear with me. We're going to still open up Illustrator because we do have some time. I know it's a long one, guys. Bear with me. I'll give you the last 40 minutes to do what you need. But in our case, I do want to get it just because it's kind of a lame part too. If it's just like, oh, and here it is in Illustrator. Illustrator is the best part. It should take you actually the least amount of time. However, for the sake of tutorial, I'm going to go ahead and wing it. Let's say that I was finished. This is not finished, by the way. It doesn't have step 1, step 2, and maybe any other generated text that I might want to have, right? So in my case, that's not too bad, but I'm still in a perspective view and it's still flat, right? So I may actually want to go to my top view, select, and maybe reorganize some things. I don't know. Maybe I need to change the rotation a little bit, maybe not. Maybe it's still not in the right spot, maybe it is, right? So again, using Gumball to dial some things in is way easier right there. I just did it in like nothing. Whereas if I try to do that in Illustrator, it's a headache and a half, right? So let's say I was finished and this was my 11 by 17. I'm going to take the entire thing, File, Export Selected, because, well, that is what I have selected. Export selected, and I'm either going to turn it into a DWG, or now they have an Adobe Illustrator file, which again, when I was in school, there was not an Adobe Illustrator file exporting from Rhino. Another reason Rhino is so much better than any other program. So I can click, go down, make sure you don't save it as a Rhino file, but if you needed to work in Rhino 2, you totally could, unlike Revit. In our case, we're going to select the Adobe Illustrator or a DWG. To be fair, both work, and honestly, my habit is DWG just because I find it to be a little bit easier. I'm going to use DWG for today and put it on my desktop. In my case, I'm going to call it exercise file 1, and obviously just a test file. Otherwise, I save so many of these, it's not even funny. And in my case, let's just save it somewhere where it's useful. However, please don't save to your desktop. Please don't put Final 1, Final 2. Start to get in a habit where you actually call out for what it is. In fact, one of the ways to really do it, guys, is your last name first, or the date, right? So today's date is what? 8/28, right? So I'm going to do 8.28.25 underscore, then the assignment. Why would I do that? Because I might need this file 5 years from today. I don't know, right? Or I might need to save it and actually another friend's going to work on it, and it can't be labeled final. In fact, we're going to practice a lot in this class. In fact, to submit your drawings or laser cut files, it'll have to be formatted in a certain way. Now, this is what stinks about other colleges, right? Texas Tech, they don't even tell you you got it wrong. UTSA, they won't even tell you got it wrong if you send your file to the laser cutter. They'll just not cut it. And you'll be like, where's my laser cuts? I needed it for my model today. And they'll say, tough luck, you didn't label it correctly. Saved me some time today. The student that was proactive and knows their good organizing skills, they're gonna get cut first, right? And it's a very real thing. To be honest, it helps manufacturing as well, right? That way we can make sure that we have all the right pieces and things like this. However, for the sake of the tutorial, let's face it, I've already spent like 2 hours on this one. So let's go for the sake of speed here and export it. Awesome. In my case, I'm going to select the earliest line. So I don't want to pick 2013 lines. I want to pick 2007 lines. It's just going to work easier with Illustrator. Obviously, this is just for DWG. If I want to export it as an AI file or Adobe Illustrator, export selected, and there's a couple of different options, right? I'll go ahead and do two for the sake of tutorial. I'll label it the same thing, but it's called an AI file. And we get some different things. Obviously, we can scale it right here. Not super important if we're not really doing anything to scale yet. Don't worry, we'll get there. But for today, I can actually just do a snapshot of the current view because it's going to maintain the exact proportions, lines, vectors, and all those kinds of things. I'll hit export and go ahead and minimize Rhinoceros. In my case, I'm going to open that file directly, whether it's the AI file or the DWG. In my case, I really appreciate the DWG. It's just tried and true. It's a habit of mine. So I'm going to double click on DWG and I'm going to scale to fit artboard. I could do original size, but what would happen if I did original size, guys? Remember how big we made this object? 25 feet. Is there any 25-foot paper hanging around? No, right? So of course, in my case, I'm going to scale to fit artboard. Now by default, it's going to pick the last artboard that I used. I use a lot of 11 by 17, so I wouldn't be surprised that I already have 11 by 17. However, if this is your first time in Illustrator as well, you'll notice that we can control the artboard. So if we go to File, Document Setup, Edit Artboards, we can control that. Now you'll see that we can control it at the top. Now if you can't see this, it's because, well, Adobe has some presets and I'm definitely a fan of Essentials Classic. I honestly don't use any of the other presets, and to be fair, even Essentials is like whack. Like, come on dude, there's like nothing there. So go to Essentials Classic and you'll realize all the tools that I'm talking about are actually there. But in my case, I already have 11 by 17. So I'll go ahead and click out, and here's where the magic begins. I don't have to draw, I don't have to touch anything, right? In fact, I already did all that in Rhino. I can hold spacebar and I can pan, just in case you didn't know. That's a game changer, by the way. That, again, I didn't know for like 2 years. But you can hold spacebar and pan, right? But we're going to go to our layers, which basically looks like two rectangles on top of each other. And we can basically isolate these one at a time. Now, you'll notice I didn't maybe use even all my layers, right? And we can isolate them one at a time, right? There's my hidden lines and there's my regular lines. Again, I should have probably been a little bit more proactive in terms of changing the line weights that I want. So let's go back to Rhino and let me tell you exactly what I mean. So for instance, we can get really fancy with the spices. How many of you guys know what line weight is? Hopefully all of us, right? Because none of us have not taken D1 yet. We've all taken it, right? But we can actually do that here too. I can call it line weight 1. Awesome. Line weight 2. Awesome. And so on and so forth. Line weight 3. I could even get fancier with the spices and go, well, line weight 1 I want to be super dark. Line weight 2 I kind of want to be my medium. And line weight 3, well, maybe I want that to be light and white, right? So awesome. Again, what's kind of nice about this is, well, I know that those 3 lines are going to be thinner than the outside lines. So in my case, all of my Make 2D are grouped, so I need to ungroup them, right? So I'm just going to do it all together and ungroup. In my case, I should get some single lines now. If that still didn't work for you, explode. However, be very careful. Explode breaks it down to its simplest form. If you have a curve, it'll blow it into 1,000 pieces, right? So be very careful how you use explode or grouped and ungrouping. They're not exactly the same thing, even though visually it kind of looks like they're doing the same thing. In my case, I'm going to select these 3 lines and I'm going to say line weight 1, right? So change object layer, or sorry, change, I selected the wrong one, change object layer. And of course you'll see that it starts changing. Maybe I want to do that for actually all these center subdivide lines. So I can select one line at a time, or I can select a few at a time and hold shift. So again, this is what I meant by do all the drawing in Rhino first. That way we can make it a little easier for ourselves, and we don't have to dare try and do this in Illustrator because, like I said, it's a pain and a half. But that's already looking pretty good compared to what I actually wanted to show you in Illustrator. Now the bad news is, yes, you do have to export this again. So very important step that you finish the drawing here. You don't necessarily have to add text in Rhino. In fact, sometimes it's kind of annoying. Illustrator can do text, and it does do it very well and still vectorize. You know what program doesn't do text well? Photoshop. Why? Because it's a rastered program. Absolutely cool. But in our case, it doesn't really matter if we do the text in Rhino or Illustrator in this case. But I'm going to export it again. I'm going to click on that same file that I had, that AI file. And let's show you what it looks like to open up an AI file as well. How about that? That way, at least for the sake of tutorial, we've gone over both. In my case, right now it's 1 foot equals 1/4 of an inch. That's pretty good if I was actually making it to scale. Again, I'm not doing anything to scale right now, so snapshot of the view. Awesome. It's going to stay vectorized and congruent anyway. I'm going to go ahead and open up another file just to show you the difference. So, File, Open. And I'm going to go ahead and open up that AI file. Now, you'll see there's nothing there. Why? Because it's off in space, Brett. Sorry, I watch a lot of Flight of the Conchords. Does anybody know who Flight of the Conchords is? Man, I'm old. Anyway, but what I meant by what was so important about that zero space, hey, where'd my Rhino go? There it is. That zero space actually is the artboard space by default in Illustrator. I kind of did that one on purpose. But as you can see, ours is way off in the distance towards the bottom right, right? So you better believe it. It's in the bottom right of Illustrator, right? Way over here. So be careful. Sometimes it's way off and it's actually without the extents of Illustrator can even go. So very often you'll open up your project and be like, where is it, sir? Right? But it is actually there, just in a realm of the unknown, right? In our case, we do need to move it up, use spacebar, and exactly why I use and prefer DWG, because it just seems to work a little bit better and the 0 point seems to work a little bit better. I don't know. Obviously I'm going to hold shift so that it stays proportional, and since I made an 11:17 ratio, well, I just need to match that up with my 11:17 ratio. You'll see that Illustrator tries to help us a little bit. Fake it till you make it, right? Very Escamilla style. And get it fairly close. After all, we're not doing this to scale yet, but essentially we will be doing the exact same things. In my case, I don't really need the boundary box anymore, so I'll go ahead and delete that and go back to what I was trying to show you. So one layer at a time. Let's try our line weight 1 first. Awesome. You're going to click on the invisible box. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but click on the invisible box of the layer and it's going to select everything in that layer. From there, I can basically just change the object. So both its color and its line weight. Say 0.5 and voila. Right? It's of course going to change that. Now, there's nothing to compare it to yet, so we have no idea if that's thick or thin or anything like that. But I'm going to lock that layer because it's done. I'm done with that layer, right? Next layer. Awesome. My hidden lines layer, and everybody knows that hidden lines are dashed. So I'm going to select all those lines. I'm going to make them pretty light because, well, hidden lines are pretty light. Actually, I'm going to make it a little darker so it stays at least visible, but I'm going to make it extremely thin. In fact, the thinnest that a line can be to any printer is 0.125. So I'm going to make that the thinnest imaginable, right? And it is pretty thin. As you can see, and rightfully so, it's a hidden line. I don't really need to see all of it. To be fair, some things are whack, right? Like little tiny lines in there that you're like, wait a minute, that's missing. I might need to actually extend it, fake it till I make it a little bit. And don't get me wrong, I could do stuff like that where nobody's gonna know, right? Nobody's gonna know. Anyway, man, no jokes today. Anyway, I know it's early in the morning, but I'm gonna take all that line. Oh, wait, I don't have to do that. I can just select the invisible box and it gets everything in that layer. That being said, I do want to actually add to the stroke. So in my case, this is what controls the stroke. I'm going to hit it, and I'm going to hit dash line. If you don't see this at first, it's because the advanced options are not checked, right? So hide options. Normally this is what you see and you're like, what? Where's the dash line? Of course, click on those 3 lines, show options, and select dash line. In my case, I'm going to make those dashes relatively small. So I'm going to go with like a 1 dash and a 1 space, and that's about it. If I zoom in, you're going to notice, dang, I didn't have to do nothing, right? All I do is change the settings and I'm done. In my case, let's lock that layer and go to the next. Awesome. Let's maybe control the line weight of that. Maybe it's important. Maybe it's supposed to be thick. Maybe I even want it colored, right? I'm definitely not against color, but I'd really encourage, in fact, almost say it's required that you only use one accent color, right? Don't overdo it. It's very easy to overdo it. I love color too, but remember, we're trying to explain to the 5-year-old how to make the bowl of cereal, not necessarily wow them with a bunch of color, right? So in our case, select all that layer again, change the line weight. Let's go with 0.65. Awesome. Next layer. Select all of it. I'm going to go with 0.75. And obviously not purple. And I like to go for something. I used to have a teacher that said never use true black, right? Because printers just don't do it very well. And he made a really good point, because what we're actually trying to achieve is the drafted look, right? We almost want to make it look like it was not made in the computer. We want to almost fool somebody as if it was drafted on an analog table. And if I know anything about graphite, is that it's not actually really black. It's actually a very dark gray, right? So in my case, I'm going to select something that kind of has that metallic-y graphite look, right? Awesome. I'm done. Can you imagine how long this would take me if I was drafting this entire thing? Right? So already a game changer for assignment 1. And look at that, man, we got the hidden lines going on in there. Beautiful. I don't know how great it looks on the, it actually looks pretty good on the projector too. We have gotten some better projectors over the years. But anyway, I will end it on a good note like this one. Obviously we can still add text, and I will let you figure out some of those things for yourself, right? Don't get me wrong, I don't want to baby you entirely, but Abigail had a very specific question. I don't think that one necessarily has to go on the recording, but is there any general questions, guys? Can't do the what?
The wire cut.
I'll help you out.
Yeah, I tried that.
But definitely not a bad question. I'm sure a few of us have some questions about wire cut. Remember, it is about the order. I have to select the clay first, then the cutting tool, then cut. So just keep that in mind. I did want to say that one for at least the recording. Good question though. Any others, guys? Yes. It'll be uploaded usually at 5 o'clock. I don't dare try to upload anything at this school because it'll take a year, right? Fortunately, I'm home. I have an upload speed of 25 megabytes per second, so it does pretty well. But unfortunately, I don't get out of here until 4, so can't get home until then. Good question though. Any others, guys? I'll leave it at that. Obviously, for